The nature of sin, the Gospel of Mary. Before we begin this study of the Gospel of Mary, we'll have an opening reading from the Gospel of Mary.
Will matter then be utterly destroyed or not? The Saviour replied, every nature, every moulded form, every creature exists in and with each other. They dissolve again into their own proper root, for the nature of matter is dissolved into what belongs to its nature. Anyone with 2 ears able to hear should listen. Then Peter said to him, you have been explaining every topic to us. Tell us one other thing. What is the sin of the world? The Saviour replied, there is no such thing as sin. Rather, you yourselves are what produces sin when you act in accordance with the nature of adultery, which is called sin. For this reason, the good came among you, pursuing the good which belongs to every nature. It will set it within its root. Then he continued, he said, this is why you get sick and die, because you love what deceives you. Anyone who thinks should consider these matters. Matter gave birth to a passion which has no image, because it derives from what is contrary to nature. A disturbing confession then occurred in the old body. That is why I told you, become content at heart.
So verse 22, the Saviour said, all nature, all formations, all creatures exist in and with one another, and they will resolve again into their own roots. So here the word matter and nature are 2 different Greek words. All natures, all formations, all creatures designate the totality of all that exists and has been created. The message is that all this will pass away. The word root here denotes origin. All nature will dissolve into its own root, that is, a resolution into dust. The word root here is used 3 times in the text, in verses 22, 23 and 27. Verse 25, Peter said to him, since you have explained everything to us, tell us also what is the sin of the world. The sin of the world about which Peter asks is defined by Jesus as the essence of fornication, or the nature of adultery and death. Sin literally means to miss the mark, like an archer shooting a bow and arrow missing the target. Sin's definition as to miss the mark, whether morally through transgression or physically. Mankind was initially created with the intention of sharing in God's glory, both physically and morally. Mankind has missed the mark both physically and morally due to the events in Eden. We are created in the womb in that fallen state and thus born in sin. The nature of transgression. Verse 26, the Saviour said, there is no sin, but it is you who make sin when you do the things that are like the nature of adultery, which is called sin. So there is no sin, that is, there is no such thing as the transgression of the law. Whilst insisting that no sin exists as such, the Saviour goes on to clarify that people do produce sin when they wrongly follow the desires of their natural sinful nature instead of nurturing their spiritual selves. For the Gospel of Mary, therefore, sin is not a matter of right and wrong acts, rather it has to do with the body of sin, or the flesh, which produces sin and brings forth death. But it is you who make sin. The disciples themselves produce or make sin by acting in accordance with the nature of adultery. The unenlightened thinking of the flesh gives birth to the works of the flesh, which are adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lustful pleasures, idolatry, sorcery, hostility, quarreling, jealousy, outbursts of anger, selfish ambition, etc., etc. So the nature of adultery is allegorical of those over whom sin reigns, thus shown in their obeying it in the lust thereof. They are styled the servants of sin. See Romans chapter 6 and verse 12, 17 and verse 19, or the weeds, Matthew chapter 13 and verse 25 and verse 38. Christ, in rebuking the Jews of his day, accused them of spiritual fornication. Ye are of your father the devil, and the lust of your father ye will do. John chapter 8 and verse 44. The Jews saw the point of the Lord's rebuke and denied that they were born of fornication, but in fact their attitude demonstrated that they were following the nature of adultery. Sin is that physical principle of the animal nature which is the cause of all its diseases, death, and resolution into dust. Inasmuch as this physical principle pervades every part of the flesh, the animal nature is styled sinful flesh, that is, flesh full of sin. Sin, I say, is an equivalent expression for human nature. The flesh produces sin, which brings forth death. Verse 27. For this reason the good came among you, pursuing the good which belongs to every nature. It will set it within its root. The good is the name that the Gospel of Mary uses for God. When we are cut off from the good, death and disease and other material things arise due to the false beliefs caused by the sin of adultery, or the nature of adultery. Here the root of perishable matter is contrasted with the proper root of a person's true spiritual nature, which the good will establish. So the closing words of Jesus' reply show that the starting point of Peter's question are his preceding reflections on matter, nature, and origin. These concepts are picked up in the word root. Verse 28. This is why you get sick and die, because you love what deceives you. Anyone who thinks should consider these things. This is why you get sick and die. Those physical effects produced by sin, which Paul calls sin that dwells in me. People's own fleshly bodies deceive them and lead them to a fatal love of perishable, material nature, which is the source of the passions as well as physical suffering and death. True knowledge can never be based upon unreliable senses. Sickness and death indicate an attachment to what is perishable. Such attachment disrupts the whole body. This attachment arises because matter brings forth wrong thinking and ignorance, which gives rise to the passions of fear, grief, desire, and bodily pleasures that lead the soul to align itself towards fleeting material concerns. Because passions are rooted in ignorance, they are contrary to the true nature of things instituted by God. The Saviour teaches the disciples instead to align themselves, become rooted toward the true nature image of the good, which is divine and eternal. True contentment of heart comes from transforming to the true image of nature that comes from God. See Romans chapter 12 and verse 2. Verse 30. Matter gave birth to a passion which has no image, because it derives from what is contrary to nature. For the gospel of Mary, the sinfulness of the human condition, the estrangement from God, is caused by matter giving birth to passion. Next, the psychic aeon. It is a small one, which is mixed with bodies by begetting in the souls and defiling them. For the first defilement of the creation found strength, and it begot every work, many works of wrath, anger, evil, malice, hatred, slander, contentment and war, lying and evil counsels, sorrows and pleasures, that they decree according to their desires. The nature of adultery, or the begetting in the souls which defiles them, should not be understood literally as natural human offsprings or conception. Rather, it is sin conceiving in the soul or in the brain. James chapter 3 and verse 15. This wisdom is not one from above coming down, but is earthly, born of the soul, demonical. Rotherham's Emphasized Bible. Psalm chapter 7 and verse 14. Any translation. Behold, the wicked man conceives evil, and is pregnant with mischief, and gives birth to lies. Philo of Alexandria. Now the female offspring of the soul are wickedness and passion.
In the Gospel of Thomas, in saying 40, Jesus said, a grapevine has been planted outside of the Father, but being unsound it will be pulled up by its roots and destroyed. To say that passion has no image means that it is not part of the Father's planting, or not a true reflection of the good. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil, and you cannot tolerate wrongdoing. For thou art not a God that has pleasure in wickedness, neither shall evil dwell with thee. The foolish shall not stand in thy sight.
Because the passions are tied to suffering and deception, and because no evil or falsehood belongs to the good, no divine image of passion can really exist, because it lacks an heavenly origin. Everything which is true and good is an image or a type of the true.